When an ancient army crosses a hostile border, they do three things immediately. They secure the high ground. And immediately, Israel breaks every conceivable rule of ancient warfare. But the generation born during the 40 years of wandering had not. For 4 decades, as Israel walked in circles waiting for the rebellious generation to die, the fundamental physical sign of the covenant had been suspended. They were biologically the descendants of Abraham, but they did not bear the mark of the promise. God is not sending an uncovenanted army into Canaan. Before they can conquer a single city, they have to physically re-enter the covenant. They have to bleed in the dust of Gilgal. This is the ultimate anti-military maneuver. By forcing the army to undergo circumcision, God is stripping away any illusion that their physical strength will win the land. They are lying on the ground, wounded and useless, entirely dependent on God to keep the Canaanite armies from marching out of Jericho and wiping them out in an afternoon. And when it is finished, God speaks to Joshua. "Today I have rolled away the reproach of Egypt from you." That is why the place is named Gilgal. The Hebrew word sounds like the verb for rolling. The reproach of Egypt, the shame of their slavery, the failure of their parents, the 40 years of aimless wandering, is finally gone. They are a covenant people again. They halt their momentum to stack rocks in a riverbed. And immediately, as the men are healing, they prepare for a meal. It is the 14th day of the month. The men are lying in the camp at Gilgal, recovering from circumcision, and the nation prepares to celebrate the Passover. This is not just a holiday on the calendar, this is a massive structural bookend in the history of Israel. Look at the symmetry. The first Exodus began with a Passover meal inside the borders of Egypt, huddled behind doors painted with blood, waiting for the angel of death to pass over them so they could finally leave. Now, exactly 40 years later, the second Exodus concludes with a Passover meal inside the borders of Canaan, gathered behind the invisible protection of Yahweh, having finally arrived. The first Passover marked their exit from slavery. The Gilgal Passover marks their entrance into the promise. They are eating the exact same meal, roasted lamb, bitter herbs, and unleavened bread, but the context has entirely changed. They are no longer a terrified group of slaves running into the desert. They are a covenanted people, marked in their own flesh, eating a meal of freedom on the land God swore to give them. But there is one detail in this meal that changes everything. They take sharp flint knives and perform a mass circumcision on their own soldiers. For 40 years, every single morning, the nation walked out of their tents and gathered bread that fell from the sky. Manna was the staple of their survival. It was the physical proof that God was keeping them alive in a place where nothing grew. But Joshua 5 records a sudden permanent shift, and they ate of the produce of the land on the day after the Passover, unleavened bread and parched grain on the very same day. And the manna ceased the day after they ate of the produce of the land. And there was no longer manna for the people of Israel, but they ate of the fruit of the land of Canaan that year. The manna stops. Instantly, completely. This is not a minor dietary change. This is the official end of the wilderness era. The manna was wilderness food. It was provisional. It was given because they were not home. The moment they eat the parched grain of Canaan, the sky closes. The transition is complete. They have crossed the water. They have stacked the stones. They have entered the covenant, and they are eating the fruit of the land. They sit down in the dirt to eat a religious meal, entirely exposed to anyone watching from the defensive watchtowers of Jericho. The preparation is over. The reality of the conquest is about to begin. And as Joshua leaves the camp to scout the fortress of Jericho, he is about to discover exactly who is actually in charge of this war. Joshua is alone. The camp at Gilgal is quiet. The men still recovering, the Passover meal finished. He leaves the perimeter and walks toward the fortress of Jericho. This is standard military reconnaissance. He is a general sizing up a heavily fortified, highly defensive target. The text will note in the very next breath that Jericho was shut up tight. No one going out, no one coming in. Joshua is looking at those walls, calculating the height, studying the approach, looking for a tactical weakness in the stone. Then he looks up, and a man is standing directly in front of him. The text in Joshua 5 gives exactly two physical details about this figure. He is standing opposite Joshua, and he has his sword drawn in his hand. This is not a distant vision. This is a sudden physical confrontation in the dirt on the edge of a war zone. It looks like tactical madness. It reads like a military disaster waiting to happen. Joshua reacts exactly the way a seasoned military commander should react to an unidentified armed man near his camp. He does not panic. He does not retreat. He walks directly up to the figure and asks a strict, binary military question. Are you for us or for our adversaries? Friend or foe? Whose side are you on? Are you part of my army, or are you fighting for the Canaanites? In Joshua's mind, there are exactly two forces on this battlefield, and this soldier must belong to one of them. The man's answer shatters that entire framework. He says, "No, but I am the commander of the army of the Lord. Now I have come." No, in Hebrew, it is a single devastating word. Lo, neither. Think about what this means for the entire theology of the conquest. Joshua naturally assumes that because Israel is the covenant people, God is essentially a divine asset attached to their military. He assumes God has come to join their war, to endorse their campaign. The commander of the Lord's army rejects the premise of the question entirely. He does not say, "I am on your side." He says, "I am in charge." He is not a mercenary for Israel. He is not a heavenly mascot for their invasion. He is leading an entirely different army, an unseen host, and he has just arrived on the battlefield. The war for Canaan is not Joshua's war. Yahweh is not there to take orders or merely guarantee Joshua's victory. Israel is being permitted to join God's war. Unless you understand what the writer is actually doing, the opening of Joshua is not the record of a strategic military campaign. That distinction changes the entire structure of the book. If God is just an ally on Israel's side, then Joshua is still the general, and the outcome depends on human strategy. But if the commander of the Lord's army has arrived, then Joshua has just been demoted. He is no longer the highest-ranking officer on the plains of Jericho. Joshua understands this instantly. He does not ask a second tactical question. He does not ask to see the unseen army. The text says Joshua fell on his face to the earth and worshipped. And then, lying in the dirt, the human general of Israel asks the only question that matters. What does my Lord say to his servant? Joshua is face down in the dust, waiting for a command. He has just surrendered control of the entire invasion. He asks what his new commanding officer wants him to do. You would expect a tactical directive: attack at dawn, flank the eastern wall, wait for my signal. Instead, the commander gives an order that has absolutely nothing to do with warfare. Take off your sandals from your feet, for the place where you are standing is holy. Stop! Look at that exact phrase. If you are an ancient Israelite reading this text, that sentence hits you like a physical shock. You know those words. 40 years earlier, a shepherd named Moses saw a bush burning in the desert without being consumed. It is the highly choreographed, point-for-point reenactment of a completely different event. It is a second Exodus. When he walked toward the fire, a voice called out from the flames, giving the exact same command, word for word. Take off your sandals from your feet, for the place on which you are standing is holy ground. The burning bush was the precise moment the first Exodus began. It was the moment Yahweh commissioned Moses to lead his people out of slavery. And now, at the exact moment the second Exodus concludes, the identical command is given to Joshua. This is not a literary coincidence, it is a theological lock. The writer is welding these two moments together to force the reader to realize what is actually happening on the plains of Jericho. When Moses took off his sandals, he was standing at the foot of Mount Sinai. It was holy ground because the presence of Yahweh was localized there. But Joshua is not at Sinai. He is standing in hostile Canaanite territory, outside a pagan fortress, surrounded by enemy watchtowers. And yet, the dirt beneath his feet is suddenly violently holy. Why? Because the ark has crossed the river. Because the commander of the unseen army has arrived. The holiness of God is no longer confined to a mountain in the wilderness. It is moving into the land. We are going to walk through the first 5 chapters of this book and watch how this entire sequence is engineered to strip away Israel's martial confidence. This changes everything about how we are supposed to read the rest of the book. The conquest of Canaan is not a political expansion. It is not an ethnic land grab. It is the holy presence of Yahweh entering the land to systematically drive out human corruption. And what is Joshua's response? He does not argue. He does not ask for clarification. He does not point out that standing barefoot makes him extremely vulnerable if the gates of Jericho suddenly open. The text simply says, "And Joshua did so." Think about the physical reality of this scene. The leader of the Israelite army on the eve of the most important battle in the history of his nation does not draw his weapon. He unlaces his sandals. He stands barefoot in the dirt. His final preparation for war is an act of total physical submission. The reenactment of the Exodus is now complete. The water has been crossed. The stones are stacked. The flesh is cut. The Passover is eaten. The commander is in charge. Israel is finally ready for Jericho. Look at the sequence we have just walked through. We are going to trace the stopped waters, the 12 stones, a river at flood stage, crossed on dry ground, a heavy wooden box replacing a wooden staff, 12 men hauling massive stones from a riverbed to build a monument before a single arrow is fired, an entire army incapacitated by circumcision in full view of an enemy stronghold. A Passover meal eaten while the manna stops falling from the sky, and a human general ordered to take off his shoes by a supernatural commander with a drawn sword. The first 5 chapters of Joshua are not the chaotic opening of a military invasion. They are a highly structured, deeply theological liturgy. They are the Exodus, run backward. And once you see this pattern, the famous story that immediately follows, the Battle of Jericho, suddenly makes complete sense. The blood in the dust. If Israel had marched up from the Jordan River and immediately attacked the walls with siege engines and battering rams, it would have been a military victory. Joshua would have been the hero. The nation would have believed that their own tactical strength had won them the land. But because they went through the strange, vulnerable liturgy of Gilgal, the Battle of Jericho cannot be misunderstood. Look at what they actually do at Jericho. They do not fight. They march in a circle for 7 days. They carry the ark. The priests blow horns. It is not a siege. It is a liturgical procession. It is the exact same behavior they displayed when crossing the Jordan. They are simply following the ark and letting Yahweh do the fighting. They establish a fortified beachhead and a terrifying encounter in the dark with a man holding a drawn sword. The walls do not fall because Israel's army is strong. The walls fall because the commander of the Lord's army is in charge. This is why memory was established before the first major battle. This is why those 12 heavy stones were dragged out of the mud and stacked at Gilgal. If Israel ever forgets that they crossed the river on dry ground, if they ever forget that they were bleeding and helpless on the plains of Canaan, if they ever forget that the man with the drawn sword is not there merely to serve their national interests, they will lose the land as quickly as they gained it. Their survival does not depend on their military strength. It depends entirely on their covenant fidelity. It depends on whether they remember the Exodus. We will see how every single strange command at the edge of the Jordan River was designed to rebuild the nation's mental model. When you strip away the familiar Sunday school version of this story, you are left with something far more terrifying and far more beautiful. You are left with a God who demands total vulnerability before he grants victory, and a people who had to learn, barefoot in the dirt, that the ground they were standing on did not belong to them. And we will discover why God demanded total, terrifying vulnerability before a single weapon was drawn. To understand how strange this invasion is, you have to look at the physical terrain. Israel is camped on the eastern side of the Jordan River. To their west lies the river itself, and just beyond it, the city of Jericho. Jericho is not just a city, it is a sentinel. It controls the crucial eastern pass into the central highlands of Canaan. If you want the land, you have to go through Jericho. But between Israel and that fortress is a massive geographical problem. The text notes, specifically in Joshua 3, that they arrive in the spring during the time of the barley harvest. This detail is not meteorological trivia. In the spring, the snow melts off Mount Hermon in the north and rushes down the Jordan Valley, and they scout the nearest enemy stronghold to prepare for a siege. A river that might normally be a manageable, muddy crossing point becomes a violent, overflowing torrent. The text explicitly states that the Jordan overflows all its banks throughout the time of harvest. The water moves fast. The crossing is impassable for a massive civilian population. This is the first obstacle, and it is here, standing at the edge of floodwaters they cannot cross, that the echoes of a prior generation begin to sound. 40 years earlier, a completely different generation of Israelites stood trapped against a different body of water, the Red Sea. In that moment, Moses stepped forward, raised a wooden staff, and a strong east wind blew all night to split the sea. It was the defining miracle of their nation. It was the moment they became a free people. Now their children face the floodwaters of the Jordan. But Moses is dead, Joshua has no staff, and there is no wind. Instead, the narrative focus shifts entirely to a heavy, gold-covered wooden box, the Ark of the Covenant. The Ark was not just a container for the stone tablets of the law. In ancient Near Eastern terms, it was the footstool of the divine throne. It was the localized physical center of Yahweh's presence among his people. You do not leave your back against a flooded river. Joshua does not stand on the bank and stretch out his hand. He orders the priests to hoist the ark onto their shoulders and walk directly into the flooded river. Think about the physical reality of this moment. The Jordan at harvest time is not a quiet creek. It is a loud, churning, dangerous surge of cold meltwater carrying mud and debris. The priests are told to walk forward until their feet hit the edge of the torrent. Notice the mechanism of the miracle. The water does not part while the nation is watching from a safe distance. The text in Joshua 3 specifies that it is only when the soles of the priests' feet touch the water's edge that the river stops flowing. And it does not merely dry up. The Hebrew says the waters coming down from above stood and rose up in a heap very far away at Adam, the city that is beside Zarethan. The river is cut off, miles upstream. The riverbed empties out, This is not a military crossing, it is a liturgical procession. The priests march into the center of the dry riverbed and stand absolutely still with the ark on their shoulders, holding the waters back by the very presence of God, while the entire nation crosses over. Every detail is engineered to force a specific realization. This is the Red Sea all over again. The writer wants the reader, and the Israelites themselves, to recognize the pattern. You do not ignore the massive walled fortress sitting just 5 miles inland, and this pattern has a direct political consequence. Just as the crossing of the Red Sea cemented Moses' authority over the newly freed slaves, the crossing of the Jordan transfers that exact authority to his successor. The text states this explicitly: "On that day the Lord exalted Joshua in the sight of all Israel, and they stood in awe of him all the days of his life, just as they had stood in awe of Moses." The first Exodus got them out of Egypt, the second Exodus brings them into the land. But getting across the riverbed is only the first phase. Once they are walking on dry ground in the middle of the channel, you would expect them to hurry up the western bank and secure a defensive perimeter. Jericho is right there. The local kings are surely watching. Instead, Joshua orders the vanguard to stop, right in the middle of the empty river. They do not rush the bank. They do not form a shield wall to protect the civilian crossing. Instead, while the priests stand bearing the heavy gold ark in the center of the channel, Joshua issues an order that stops the military advance cold. And you absolutely do not order your entire fighting force to undergo a painful physical procedure that will leave them bleeding, feverish, and incapacitated for days in open country. He calls 12 men forward, one from every tribe. He tells them to walk back down into the deepest part of the riverbed, right to where the priests are standing, and pick up a rock. And the physical detail here matters. Joshua does not ask for a handful of gravel. He commands each man to take up a stone on his shoulder. These are massive, water-smoothed boulders, heavy with river mud, requiring the full strength of a grown man to lift. Think about the tension of this scene. An entire nation is trying to cross a flood-stage river. The water is walled up miles away by a force they cannot see. The psychological pressure to move quickly must be immense. Every second feels like borrowed time. And right in the middle of this terrifying, precarious bottleneck, 12 men are told to bend down in the mud, heave heavy rocks onto their backs, and slowly carry them up the western bank. They haul them to their first camp at a place called Gilgal, and they stack them. They build a monument before they build a fortress. But that is exactly what the nation of Israel does. Why 12 stones? Because 12 is the structural DNA of Israel. It represents every single family line, including the 2.5 tribes who will ultimately settle back on the eastern side of the river. It is an architectural declaration that the entire nation crossed on dry ground together. No one gets to opt out of the memory. And memory is exactly what this is about. In the ancient Near East, an invading king would erect a monument to commemorate his own military conquest, a victory stele, a record of enemies crushed and cities burned. But Israel builds their monument before they have fought a single battle. And the stones do not glorify Joshua's leadership. Listen to the mechanism Joshua gives for this pile of rocks. He says, "When your children ask their fathers in times to come, 'What do these stones mean?' then you shall let your children know Israel passed over this Jordan on dry ground." In biblical theology, memory is not nostalgia. Memory is a survival mechanism. The previous generation, the ones whose bones were left in the wilderness, did not fail because they lacked swords. They failed because they suffered from chronic, fatal amnesia. In the opening chapters of the book of Joshua, a nomadic people finally steps onto the plains of Canaan. The moment they got thirsty, they forgot the Red Sea. The moment they saw giants, they forgot the 10 plagues. They consistently trusted what they could see in the present over what God had done in the past. Joshua is ensuring this new generation does not make the same mistake. Memory is treated as a matter of immediate national security. If they march toward Jericho believing that their own tactical brilliance brought them into Canaan, they will be slaughtered. The rocks are a physical anchor, a heavy, tactile reminder pulled straight from the river bottom, proving that they only survive by divine intervention. But stacking stones is only the first delay, because what happens next at Gilgal defies all human logic. Israel is now camped at Gilgal, directly on the western plains. They have crossed the border. The 40-year wait is over. Moses is dead. Joshua is in command. The invasion has officially begun. Jericho is visible on the horizon just a few miles away. The element of surprise is gone. The Canaanite kings know they are there. This is the moment a general fortifies his position. You build earthworks, you dig trenches, you drill the infantry and prepare for a counterattack. Instead, Joshua receives a new command from Yahweh. Make flint knives and circumcise the sons of Israel. Think about the absolute tactical absurdity of this order. This is an army in hostile territory, and the command is to take sharp stone blades and perform a mass surgery that will physically incapacitate every single fighting-age man in the camp. For days they will be feverish, in severe pain, and entirely unable to walk, let alone hold a shield or swing a sword. If you want to understand just how dangerous this moment was, you only have to look back at the book of Genesis. Centuries earlier, 2 of Israel's own ancestors, Simeon and Levi, slaughtered an entire city of Canaanite men simply by waiting until they were sore from this exact procedure. They wiped out a town without losing a man. Joshua is intentionally putting his entire army into that exact state of helplessness, in plain sight of Jericho. Why? Because of what happened in the wilderness. The text explains that the generation of men who came out of Egypt, the ones who rebelled and refused to enter the land 40 years earlier, had been circumcised.